Welcome everyone to Goodway Group's webinar for leveraging B2B social marketing for growth. My name is Tracy Asbury and I am the social investment lead here at Goodway Group. Here is our agenda for today. Oops. So what we'll do is we'll go through some questions for our panel to explore some key strategies and insights for brands and advertisers to consider for their B2B marketing. During the panel discussion, which should be about 45 minutes, we highly encourage to use chat for comments and questions, but please also know that we will try to save time at the end for Q&A. And if we don't get to your question, we will follow up via email to make sure that your question is answered. Also, you don't need to worry about taking any notes. We will send this recording out after we conclude. So we do have two experts in the B2B space with us today on our panel. We have Lindsay Scully, who is a paid social media manager who serves as Goodway Group's LinkedIn subject matter expert on the B2B activation team. Goodway is a leading data-driven and technology-enabled digital media and marketing services firm with offices in the US and the UK. We help B2B brands reach high-value buyers, increase revenue, and unlock unparalleled growth. We also have on our panel Ellen Vlagakos, who is a senior agency development lead at LinkedIn. Ellen has been our amazing agency partner here for about over a year, so we are very lucky and grateful for her to be joining. And as you all likely know, LinkedIn connects the world's professionals to make them more productive and successful. With over 1 billion members worldwide, including executives from every Fortune 500 company, LinkedIn is the world's largest professional network. Ladies, thank you so much for taking the time to join our panel today.
Thank you, Tracy. It's great to be here.
Happy to be here.
Yeah. So we are going to start with actually a question for our audience. So if you could pull out your phones and open up the Mentimeter link that Matt will put in the chat. I'll share the little fun word cloud. Okay. So when you hear B2B marketing, tell us what comes to mind first. What do you think? What do you think? Some things. Use a friendly care.
Do we need to refresh it for it to populate?
Here we go. Okay. So we've got lead gen, CRM, digital. These are all very good responses for what we think of B2B marketing. With that, we also wanted to ask one more question before we dive into some key strategies and insights. So the next Mentimeter question is, what do you consider to be your biggest challenge within B2B marketing? We've got a measurement chat comment. Very true. Luckily, we'll be covering that today. Let's see. I'll put in one of the answers. Matt, can you send me a new link? Maybe I can refresh this one. Okay. Perfect. Closed loop reporting, attribution, measurement. All right, so that seems to be a key theme here. Thank you all for your answers. So Ellen and Lindsay, after seeing what other people think a lot about measurement and attribution, data and analytics, what would you say is one fact about B2B and one common misconception? Ellen, we can start with you.
Okay. So I loved the answers. Thanks everyone for participating. I would say, I think one fact for sure is that the buying journey is long. And I think that we're seeing it get longer and broader. I think just in general, that B2B buying journey is definitely super complex and has a number of different buying group dynamics. In terms of misconception, or wait, was I answering misconception?
Yeah.
I would say, so I loved the measurement, and I can talk a little bit more about that too. But I would say like top of mind for me, having worked on a number of B2B clients during my agency days, was that B2B isn't creative. B2B is maybe a little boring, and people just don't understand it, which I think could also be factual, right? And it is complex.
Right. Good. Yeah, I do think it's something that maybe has evolved over time. Lindsay, how about you?
I think to piggyback on the creative piece, I think sometimes the misconception is that you are targeting, because you're targeting businesses, you're not targeting humans. And at the end of the day, and I think this will speak to conversations later around creative, is we're still trying to reach humans, just like B2C is. We're just focusing on slightly different problems and solutions for those problems. So we have to think a little bit differently about how we create a compelling and kind of emotional messaging and creative around that.
Awesome. So, Lindsay, when a client comes to you and you want to talk to them about B2B strategy at Goodway Group, what is one of the key strategies? Where do you typically start?
Yeah. So understanding the overall business goals is always going to be, no matter what client we're engaging with, that's top of mind for us, because that's going to play into how we're able to assess what measurement makes sense and how we're laddering up to those. Beyond that, really understanding what the ICP or ideal customer profile is, and who we need to be reaching. Having that alignment between what leads sales finds valuable helps inform marketing of who we need to reach. And those kind of decision makers are going to be a little different from that overall buying committee. So understanding kind of those different interests that are at play helps shape the overall strategy by just saying, okay, who do we need to get in front of to kind of kick off what we're doing in terms of a strategy.
Yeah, that can sometimes be a little difficult. But when you do kind of get the strategy started, how do you evaluate which publishers to activate?
Yeah, so this ties in nicely. Once we figured out what that audience is that we need to reach, and we might be working off a target account list, if they're kind of utilizing that ABM strategy, we might have something a little broader. We want to dive into audience insights and understand where is that audience spending time, where can we get in front of them, and depending on those channels, what targeting is available. We might think that, LinkedIn is a good example. I think everyone thinks of first, and we love that. And one of the great options with LinkedIn is that we do have so much availability of the targeting parameters, such as job titles, that are really vital to ensure we're reaching the right buying committee and right decision makers. Whereas on other platforms, you might be able to focus more on interest that may not necessarily inform if someone is part of that ultimate buying committee. So blending that research and insights together in order to determine what platforms we're going to be able to efficiently activate on, and also understanding that content we're putting out there on those channels, how are people interacting with it, and does it make sense to have that available? Again, on LinkedIn, we can put in content that's more likely to be truly consumed versus just scrolled past. So that's really important to think about as well.
Awesome. For Ellen, I know that we are, heavily involved with LinkedIn, but are there any partners or solutions that you want to highlight in terms of activating for B2B?
Yeah, definitely. So as you mentioned, and thank you for mentioning it, we did hit our 1 billion users last year, which was incredible. And then when you think about that on a global level, that is our first party data, which, like Lindsay mentioned, highly valuable when it comes to targeting, because of job titles, collection of engagement data, the content that's being put out there, and that's on a global level. So when you are looking at, a buying group, you're looking at a global buying group, and then we have obviously that first party data. In terms of, going into like partners and third party or partners or data providers, we do have a plethora of partners. I know Goodway has one partnership with LiveRamp. They have been in our marketing program, partner program since 2016. And we have over 700 mutual customers with LiveRamp. And they're just one of many, different data providers and partners that we work with for matched audiences, audience insights, et cetera. So aside from our first party data, you also get, just this tremendous access to a whole other network of data providers.
Yeah, that's super helpful to know. But as we kind of, as Goodway Group at least, focuses on the paid media side of things, what practical advice can either of you give to help marketers drive better outcomes for their social campaigns based on your own experiences or things that you've seen?
I can go. So just like I mentioned with our robust targeting options, I think, making sure when you are building out your campaign and figuring out your goal, making sure that you have those targeting options in place on how to reach the most relevant audience. There's obviously some other things that may or may not seem obvious to some, but like creating compelling content. Making sure that the content, whether it's one piece of content or multiple, is highlighting the key benefits of your product and service, is eye-catching, has a strong call to action, making sure that like these are just some like practical things that will definitely help the campaign and your outcome. Obviously the ability to test different formats. LinkedIn, we have a multiple multiple formats. We're constantly also evaluating our current formats, creating new formats, which I can get into a little bit more. But essentially what you want your campaign to do, aside from like reaching the right audience, is to like evoke some emotion, memorability, and inspiration.
I think also understanding where you're placing that content, what platforms you're utilizing, and making sure that you're adapting that creative is really important. I think sometimes it's easy for clients to say, well, we'll just resize stuff. There are some platforms that's going to work a little bit better on than others. So making sure that you're taking into account the best practices for individual platforms. Along the lines with targeting, I know that sometimes budgets can be a bit of a hindrance, something to consider. Think looking at that audience and taking a little bit of a Goldilocks approach in terms of how big or small you want to make it. There's, especially on LinkedIn, there's kind of a sweet spot between it being such a small audience that you can't effectively reach users and such a large audience that you can't effectively get the impression volume that you might want to drive action, whether that be upper funnel or lower funnel. So making sure that you're creating an audience size that is conducive to the budget that you have available is also really important. I think something that we see a lot being something that we need to help clients kind of level up on in terms of selecting that correct audience.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I mean, we do realize, like it really depends on, how big your budget is, the kind of content that you have, who you're trying to reach, et cetera. I would say, with the trend of, or not even trend anymore, but with the AI, a couple of solutions that LinkedIn has for this, I would say that's actually great for when you are looking at, what kind of budgets you have. Like we have predictive audiences, right? So predictive audience is a newer product. It will combine your brand account and the data source that lives within that account, along with LinkedIn's AI, to automatically generate new custom audiences to utilize in your campaign. So if volume is a challenge, this could potentially help with that, right? We also have a beta right now called Accelerate. It's another AI where, kind of does like a recommendation of an end-to-end campaign. And again, taking into account that budget size, that audience size, that will do the creation and make automatic recommendations, optimizations for that audience and creates in creative. But the great thing about it, because I think a lot of people are nervous with AI, sometimes myself included. But obviously with some of these products that we have now, you still have that human element touch to make sure that you're fine tuning your campaign. You're also, if you don't agree with the optimizations. And one other thing that I'll add to in terms of, audience size, et cetera, is our LinkedIn audience network, I think, can play to both a bigger budget and a smaller budget. And again, depending on the audience size. And if you're trying to reach a bigger audience size, we have seen a lot of success with accounts who have launched the LinkedIn audience network. On average, we do see lower CPMs and CPCs, as well as higher video completion rates, or just in general engagement with, anything within our LinkedIn audience network. So, and then, again, like with the option, depending on budget, I would say, trying to do A/B testing constantly, like playing around and figuring out like different optimizations that you can utilize to create more efficiencies is key.
Yeah, that's super helpful. For audience network, is that something where you would want to focus on a specific type of creative, like a video or static?
I mean, you can do both for sure. We have seen success with video for the LinkedIn Audience Network. I think, you could definitely test any of the different units available.
Cool. Yeah, that's good advice. So, Lindsay, I know you mentioned testing and specific metrics, but how do you measure the success of B2B social initiatives and kind of tie those back to the overall business goals?
Yeah, so when we're thinking through those business goals that we're working through, we want to make sure we're taking a full funnel approach and understanding how those different pieces of the funnel are going to play in. Obviously, you're going to have slightly different metrics that are important to an awareness campaign you're running versus a lower funnel lead gen campaign. Part of that is understanding as we feed to that full business objective, what that looks like, really outlining what are kind of campaign success metrics per channel versus overall business goals. And then making sure that you have ways, especially when you get down to kind of lead volume, ways to qualify leads, having that alignment between sales and marketing to really understand if you're getting the right kind of leads. Anytime you can kind of adjust the campaign metrics to more of a pipeline metric. So for an example, a traffic campaign, we might be looking at clicks in platform or landing page views, but we want to make sure that we understand, and this might be from more of a analytics perspective in GA4, or if you're using something else, if you have stuff tying back to a CRM, what are those engaged site metrics? How many pages is a user getting? What is your average pages per session or per user? Those type of metrics to better understand what type of engagement you're getting from those target accounts or that buying committee overall. There's certain platforms, like we have a lot of clients who utilize 6 Sense, which integrates with LinkedIn, which is really nice, as well as some other channels. So we're able to kind of look at platform metrics and then tie it back and see those pipeline metrics and how we're feeding that overall full funnel approach. So that's really nice when it's available, but we have ways to kind of back in based on the data and analytics available to understand that kind of full movement.
And is something that you have to kind of rely on is data and analytics that the client prefers?
Yes, definitely understanding what metrics matter to the client. I think there's definitely should and it often is education from an agency perspective around what we may need to look at to understand the success of an individual campaign, but understanding the metrics that are important to the client and why. I think we've definitely seen with certain clients, it may not be immediately recognizable why one metric that you would think of not being maybe associated with that type of campaign is important, but to them feeds maybe a business need or pain point that they haven't even clearly outlined. So being unafraid to ask like why something is important to them is really a good step. And I think something I would encourage any media managers, client service members to ask and dig in so that we're making sure as media managers, once in platform, we're pulling those metrics, lining them back up and really understanding what's important. And if for some reason a metric might be dropping or not performing as the client would expect, having answers as to why and whether that's a red flag that we need to address or something that maybe they were told is really important under certain circumstances, but for what you're running isn't as important. I think that confusion is often there, especially as data and analytics continues to evolve over time and change and really rely on what tools you're using.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And as we saw in the Mentimeter, Ellen, measurement is a really big component that a lot of these B2B marketers are thinking about. Lindsay has gone through a few examples of outside partners, but what are some measurement solutions that LinkedIn specifically offers?
Yeah, I mean, I will say this past year and change, I mean, the amount of measurement conversations and basically every meeting is, it's just, I mean, it all goes back to measurement. We hear from our agencies, and I know you and I have spoken about measurement extensively, Tracy, that it's actually like a big pain point. And like Lindsay mentioned, right? Like, I think a lot of clients are like more data, more data, more data. But when you start adding longer sales cycles, multiple buyer committees, what does all of that data look like? So, even just recently, we did a as part of our conversion API. There was a client as part of the beta, and one of our learnings was capture everything. The more data collection, the better. But then again, like looking at that data and saying, okay, what are we going to focus on? What are the goals? And then what data can we extract to achieve those goals? For LinkedIn specifically, we have actually quadrupled the amount of capabilities that we have from a measurement perspective in this last year alone. I won't get into, everything available or everything coming. I am happy to do follow-ups if anyone on this call is more interested in learning about the measurement capabilities that we have. But just in general, again, looking at our first party data, we have, like that capability of targeting first party data, but then looking at some of our other solutions, like through our insights tag, we have capabilities looking at website actions. I mentioned conversion API, other API solutions. So those are just a few of what's been happening or what's kind of top of mind for us at LinkedIn.
Yeah, I personally was very excited about the conversions API. That's been super helpful for other social platforms. So I was happy that LinkedIn kind of hopped on that.
Yep.
Aside from measurement, what are maybe some other emerging trends in the B2B social marketing space that we should be aware of?
So I'll say that I don't know if I would necessarily say that these are trends, but something to keep top of mind. I'll go into like a lot of creative or good content that we see on the platform are ones that evoke emotion, right? So, and it doesn't have to be like a physical reaction, like, crying, laughing, or whatever, but like something that makes you feel inspired or, or is just memorable or makes you just kind of smile. So I would say, like first thing is like, you want to have some emotion from your ads. There is actually one, it's not a B2B ad, but it's from 2014. I think it was Super Bowl. The commercial is called Dear Sophie. I don't know if anyone who is on this call has ever seen it. If not, I highly recommend, if you need something feel good, to watch it after this call. But it's called Dear Sophie, and it was a Google commercial, I think the Super Bowl 2014. And I still remember it to this day. It is hands down my favorite commercial ever. And not only do I remember it, and I don't know that it necessarily prompted me to write more emails using Gmail or use Google more often, but I remember the brand, right? And I remember how I felt. And it's just one of like the greatest commercials, but like it evoked that emotion, right? So much so that I remember this brand. I would say also like what we're seeing a lot of, there are two other things that we're seeing a lot of right now, and that's the creation of nostalgia. So a lot of brands are creating, like we're seeing Stranger Things ads, and then there were like Microsoft, our parent company, had created some ads where it was like that, like Windows 95 or whatever, solitaire when you're waiting for, your AOL dial-up to start your internet, but then you're actually like just playing solitaire while you're waiting. Minecraft, old imagery, so that like that sense of nostalgia of like how things were. And then the third, which again, seeing a lot of, and I think that this is so important, is just the authenticity of brands and their purpose. So we're seeing this so much with a lot of brands, not just B2B, a lot of B2B though, but also just like their commitment to DEI efforts, their commitment to sustainability. So, I think having that and actually having a voice as a brand for, these types of things is super, super important.
Yeah, that's really interesting too, because we see a lot of the humanizing kind of efforts on other social platforms. So it's really cool to see that kind of translating over in a more professional setting. So I really like that. Lindsay, from an agency perspective, is there any other trends that we can kind of elaborate on?
Yeah, I think you're seeing a lot of ABM and ABX being kind of buzzwords right now. I think it's important to note that the idea of account-based marketing isn't really that new, but we have more tools now and more sophistication around it in terms of actually being able to identify those intent audiences, act on them, and measure them with tools like 6sense or demand-based. There's a lot of options out there. So it's understanding how you can really activate on those types of strategies in order to see and measure results. I think we're going to continue to see that evolve, but it's really cool to be at a point where we're seeing sophistication of that and kind of new thought and strategy around how to activate those types of campaigns.
Yeah, that sounds exciting. So Ellen, as you mentioned, creative is a very large component of successful campaigns. Can you elaborate a little bit on the role that content plays for building relationships within B2B audiences?
Yes. So, so I know I mentioned earlier, like one of my, misconceptions is about, B2B maybe being a little bit less creative. But, you know, some people might think this, but I think it's so important, as we think about, B2B and just like the longer sales cycle and like the buyer's journey. So there was an article a couple of years ago about B2B buyers consuming an average of 13 pieces of content before deciding on a partner, product, solution, which honestly, if you think about like that number, looking at 13 different pieces of content, wherever it is, we like content is just so important because B2B is such a high consideration, a long consideration, type of cycle. But then not only that, but like looking at, high consideration products in general, like we are not selling toothpaste, right? As B2B marketers, we are looking at someone who might be in the market for something in 5 years from now. So some stats around this are like 75% of companies buy computers for their employees every 4 years. I kind of think that's a lot soon, but but when you think about that, like in 4 years from now, if they're going to buy like computers, what are they going to buy in 4 years from now? And then like looking at, other high consideration items, 90% of consumers buy a new car every 10 years. So what does that look like? What are we looking at from that perspective? How does your brand stay relevant? How do you ensure that your brand stays relevant and memorable? And so we have at LinkedIn, I encourage anyone who's doing B2B marketing, which I'm hoping is everyone on this call, to check out the B2B Institute, which is LinkedIn's think tank of research. And so the B2B Institute did research. It is called the 95-5 rule, which advises advertisers to consider the likelihood of not buying something today, right? Like they're advertising to people who are probably not going to buy anything at this moment. Current buyers only make up 5%. And then out of market buyers, or buyers who may buy that, laptop or computer in 4 years from now, are 95%, which is what the 95-5 rule is. So at the end of the day, the brand that's remembered is the brand that will be bought. So what does that mean, right? Like some people want to take out their brand advertising, they obviously want to focus on the lower funnel, understandable completely. But does that mean then that, you're losing out on, those prospective buyers? Some other resources and research that I highly suggest anyone who's a B2B marketer to check out is the CMO scorecard that also lives on the B2B Institute website, which just, continues to influence how organizations connect brand advertising metrics to business outcomes. It's one of our top downloaded reports. So I highly recommend for those on the call to check it out.
Awesome. And we did get a question in the chat about growing audiences organically. Is that something that you can kind of advise for? Is it something where the brand needs to be posting as the company? Is it the, executives from the company keeping an organic presence alive? What does that look like?
Yeah, I would say, so one like really great advantage with LinkedIn as, one of the top, business and professional networks is our organic play. So we see that, I would say most companies have a page. We have about, I think, 67 million companies that have a brand page on the LinkedIn platform. 40% of LinkedIn visitors, and I have a paid search background. So when I think about LinkedIn, and the how people come on to LinkedIn, it's usually with an intent, right? And that could be, sometimes it's the intention to look for a job, but a lot of times, visitors who are on the LinkedIn platform, especially from a marketing perspective, are visiting the company page, the company's page, right? So how important is it to, one, have followers who are engaging with your content, and two, making sure that the company is actually engaging with their audience, right? The people who are actually following them. So we do see that pages, company pages that post on a weekly basis see over 5 times the amount of followers and engagement in content, which will lead me to, so organic is super important from a social media perspective and just driving traffic to a company's homepage from LinkedIn. But also, we just launched last year Thought Leader Ads, which is a paid product. However, that Thought Leader ad, as you were saying earlier, Tracy, like humanizing a brand, right? So you're hearing from a thought leader of a company. And I think about myself and, even though I'm in marketing and I know, how all of this works, Delta loves to send me emails from their CEO, and I read them. And I don't know who wrote it. There's a level of authenticity. I do think Delta likes to keep me informed, and I like to be kept informed. So I do appreciate that. And then, with the thought leader ads, we do see like it's like 2 times higher click-through rates, higher engagement rates. So if you're, looking to add something new to your campaign, advertising, I would say check out Thought Leader Ads, and getting that leader from that brand to engage and humanize that brand. We also see that having organic and paid play together on the platform, and this kind of goes, again, I had that paid search background, where having them play together increases the probability that someone will see your ad, that they will engage with that ad, but then it'll also reduce your costs. So it's so advantageous to have both of them playing together.
Yeah, that's really good. It's a good point. So Lindsay, I know we talked a little bit about organic pushes and how critical creative is, but what are some other B2B best practices from the paid media perspective as it applies to social?
I think one thing that's important to think about when you're developing your creative is understanding what part of the funnel someone's in. As Ellen mentioned, your actual action takers, you only have about 5% of your overall audience in that stage where they're ready to take an action. So understanding what the rest of that funnel looks like and what type of content you should be putting in front of them and what type of calls to action you're utilizing with that content. So if you're doing middle of funnel content, you want to make sure that you're not asking users for a big lift, whether that's means keeping more content ungated so that they can be educating themselves and becoming familiar with your brand and your offerings and the problems you're trying to solve, versus trying to get emails from people who really may not be the best qualified lead because they might not be that decision maker, but they're an important part of the buying committee. that goes back to understanding, your target account list, your addressable market, and what that difference in audiences between those decision makers and your buying committee. I think one mistake that we see kind of frequently with clients is that they have all this content that they want to use, but it may not make sense for the stage that the audience is that they're trying to serve it to. So using that creative content strategy in play with that larger media strategy is really important to ensure that you're creating a story along that customer journey that makes sense.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. From my social experience over nearly the past decade, when all the channels have synergy, the user experience is seamless, which makes the brand performance soar, and it really just is a win-win, especially on social platforms. So, Ellen, I know that you've probably seen in your time at LinkedIn a wide range of media budgets. Where can advertisers get the most out of their ad dollars with LinkedIn?
I will say that, obviously testing out, like I mentioned, the thought leader ads, looking at some of the other products. Again, I think it really depends on the goal. Are we looking at upper, mid, lower funnel? But like looking at the different types of products that we have to offer. I mentioned the LinkedIn Audience Network is one thing to, if the budgets are a little smaller, but you wanting to cast that wider net, that would definitely be something to explore. But I would say that just looking and testing and learning and continuously making adjustments to your campaign is my suggestion. I also would say like looking at like the newer products that we have available, those Accelerate AI, predictive audiences. Those are the ones I would say to test out now.
Yeah. So I know like in the past, we've seen to where CPMs kind of get a little bit higher as the users aren't as frequent visitors on LinkedIn as other platforms. How do you kind of combat that? Is it through making the content speak to them a little bit more, having a stronger sell? What's the best practice for reaching them?
Oh gosh, the $1,000,000 question. I think that is the question I get always, and I don't know that I actually have like the best answer to that. LinkedIn is known for being a little more expensive, but we also have that first party data that really I think is a great qualifier for who you're reaching, that high consideration, the amount of information too that we have on our over 1 billion users on the platform. Again, I think really just, for me, kind of coming from a search marketing background and also like, just optimization of campaigns, I would say that pulling different levers, right? Your content is key, or king. Content is king. But content is so important, but also you just don't want to like throw your content out there and set it and forget it, right? Like you want to actually look at what's performing. Is video outperforming? Where is it outperforming? Are we testing certain things? Do we have the right mix from brand to, demand? So it is $1,000,000 question, but I think like the levers being pulled is really what's important.
Perfect. I know it's $1,000,000 question. Didn't mean to put you on the spot there, but it is something that we get a lot. So Lindsay, as we kind of round out the rest of these questions, what is something that brands and advertisers can do right now once they leave this webinar to help their B2B marketing efforts?
I think one of the most important things that the marketing team can do and make sure that there's alignment between them and sales. Understanding what a qualified lead to sales means and who they're able to ultimately convert should help inform what that audience needs to look like for marketing. And then doing that exercise of who else needs to be included as part of that buying committee. That's going to inform where you want to place ads, what type of content you want to develop. So having that alignment, I think it's often said over and over again, but it's really important because you can get all the leads in the world. And if sales thinks they're not quality leads, you're not going to get very far. And there's going to be a lot of friction where instead there could be a lot of synergy.
Perfect. Ellen, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, I mean, I will say that absolutely sales and marketing alignment. I think that 100%. One thing that just came to my mind as I mentioned the B2B Institute, is where like the financial folks, come into play, right? Like, how do you get buy-in from the CFO? And there's definitely some research on the B2B Institute website that supports that. If anyone wants to check it out, like first and foremost, 100% sales and marketing alignment, but also, looking at some of the other, I would say maybe not cross-functionals, but like, other parties within the organization or company that could influence, what you're doing with your brand and how you're advertising it to reach those goals.
Right. And
I love that.
Lindsay, I think you mentioned earlier about the insights for the audiences. What's something that these brands or advertisers can go and look at in their accounts for those insights?
Oh, it can range, but that's such a good question. I like to think of it often in terms of what's going to create targeting parameters. Part of that's probably my buyer brain at work. But understanding, if your decision makers are typically C-suite level or they a little lower, are you seeing the people who are engaging with your content, clicking on your ads? And these are insights that, especially on LinkedIn, you can kind of dive into in campaign performance. Is it mostly middle managers who are engaging with content and your leads are coming from director level, understanding where they might fit into that hierarchy, as well as job titles and company industries. Those are types of things that are going to help you work through what that ideal customer profile looks like and what those audiences need to develop to look like.
Yeah, I think that's something really interesting that you can kind of glean new insights from on your specific page. Like there could be something in the insights that break a preconceived notion about your audiences. So it's always good to kind of take a look at those things.
And I believe, Ellen, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's some level of similar insights available with page engagement on LinkedIn.
Yes. Yep.
So
Yeah, I would say like, I mean, we have like the company engagement report. We also have a little different, but like if you connect to your CRM, the revenue attribution report. So there are a number of different reports. And I mean, like I said, we did launch quite a hefty amount of measurement capabilities this last year. So for anyone on the call who, isn't as familiar with LinkedIn or wants to learn more about either the measurement or some of the products, please connect with me on LinkedIn, or we can send a follow-up after this call. I'm happy to, to provide information. Sorry, Lindsay, I had to give that plug, but yes, we have several, different types of reports available.
Perfect. Yeah, we did get a question in the Q&A that's a little bit on that topic. How do you best coach your clients or internal sales team members about interpreting the data and how to connect it back to your buying committee?
So I think for us, we think about it not necessarily as like coaching, but crafting that story. Like we're not sending our clients reports that are just paid media data, because the average person who gets that, if they're not used to being in platform and seeing those metrics, they can't infer much from it. What we're going to do is pull out those insights of here's a couple of key pieces of data and how does that relate back to those business goals. We're going to do kind of that steering for them, so that they can then ask more meaningful questions or take away better insights, because we're in the weeds so that they don't have to be. I think that's really our responsibility as media managers, as an agency, to fill those knowledge gaps and explain that data and give them back. Okay, this is what we're seeing, and that means that we want to spend a little bit more money here. We want to refine this audience. We want more of this type of content, or we need to do X, Y, and Z. I think that's how we approach that, to really give our clients the most valuable information at the end of the day.
Perfect. So we did get another question about, and Ellen, this might be a good one for you. What type of videos tend to perform best for top of funnel versus middle of funnel? I know there's a lot of different types of video content. So like, the vertical style or GIFs or branded content. So is there anything that really has started to increase performance?
I mean, I will say that video in general, and I don't know that I can speak to which type performs the best in terms of, I don't know if TikTok style performs great on LinkedIn. I have no idea, so I can't answer that. But I know that like we've done video performs excellent on LinkedIn. And one thing that we have seen is, I think in general you want to have it less than 30 seconds or 30 seconds and less. But a long form video, depending on the content and who the audience is, actually does do well on LinkedIn, because again, like the type of buying committee that you're targeting, who you're actually speaking to, might be very interested in the intricacies of this product, especially on the lower funnel. So I would say, I would say video, definitely, if you have video content, utilize it on LinkedIn. But depending on, what you're trying to get out there, it might make sense to have it, in certain parts of the funnel in terms of like the length as well. In terms of the TikTok style, I'm not sure. So I can't really answer that. Lindsay, I don't know if you have tested anything that maybe has resonated really well.
Most of mine, I would say, follow kind of what you described, where certain long form content can do really well. I think one piece to consider is how users are interacting with that video, for example. And I think this is where TikTok tends to kind of differentiate between some of the other social platforms. TikTok is very much a sound on platform. Users open it, they expect there to be sound with videos. Whereas if you're opening up Instagram, depending on the situation, you may not be in a place where you want to hear the video. But if it has captions, you can consume it. I haven't necessarily seen any particular stats myself on if LinkedIn recommends kind of with or without sound or what performs better. So it'd be great to know. I feel like we tend to, as a best practice, say include captions so that if someone's watching without sound, they can still get kind of the full experience of the video.
Yeah, I would say, I would say with captions for sure. I don't have stats around the with or without, but I would say, in terms of what I've seen on the platform, I do see a lot of content with captions.
I did also see an interesting stat the other day that millennials and Gen Z watch streaming videos with captions on, and I did not know that. So
I can't say that I identify as one of those
No.
millennials, but I have many a friend who does.
Awesome. Well, if there are any other questions that maybe didn't get answered or didn't get asked, please follow up with us. We also wanted to make sure that you have our LinkedIn profiles available. So if you want to connect with any of us after the webinar, please feel free to do so. Contact us with questions. And we are very happy to have Ellen and Lindsay on our panel today. Thank you so much for coming. And I will show this QR code that has a couple of more pieces of content that you can download. I'll leave this up for a couple minutes. And thank you everybody for coming today.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Tracy. Thanks, Lindsay. And thank you
Thank
all
you.
on the call today.
Bye.
Thank
Hope
you.
y'all have a good rest of the week.